Jeannine Kunz.
Thank you. Welcome. I know the morning sometimes comes fast after our late nights and enjoyable times here on the island. SME is proud to have organized this panel of leaders, dynamic, forward-thinking individuals who are going to share their thoughts and their perspectives on what's Michigan's role in America's defense. And I'd like just to spend a couple minutes on SME, who we are, and why is this topic important to us. SME is a national nonprofit. And while we are national, let me point out that our almost 100 years have been grounded, born and raised in Southeast Michigan. It's hard not to say born and raised in South Detroit, by the way, for Journey, but so as an organization and a nonprofit dedicated to the advancement of manufacturing, we work across the country and certainly here in Michigan, looking to help manufacturers with workforce issues, supply chain issues, technology adoption, and the like. Our purpose and our charter is to advance manufacturing to drive competitiveness, resiliency, and national security for communities, for regions, for state, and for our nation. And I think if you think about those topics, and I know Governor Whitmer talks a lot about this, there's a strong connection and interconnection between the strength and the capabilities of manufacturing, along with our economy, our resiliency, and our national security. I think I even heard Mayor Duggan talk about that yesterday, if anyone heard him talk about the resurgence of Detroit and how manufacturing played a key role in that. Last week, I had the opportunity to be in DC, and I chair the Manufacturing Division's Workforce Committee for the National Defense Industrial Association. And I can share with you at that conference the amount of discussion that is happening at this moment, at this time, on the importance of our manufacturing capabilities in the entire industrial base, let alone our defense industrial base. There's concerns about our national security. If we need surge capacity at these times, we need a strong manufacturing base. And so as I think about this session and I look at Michigan's background and its legacy and its history as the arsenal of democracy, in World War II, how Michigan played a pivotal role in surge capacity and building the kinds of things that our war fighters and our allies needed in that war. I think as a Michigander myself, I think we sometimes forget the strength of manufacturing in this state. I don't know if you know, Michigan has the largest concentration of manufacturing engineers in the country. We have some of the best research capabilities and universities and institutions. We certainly have what just happened at Selfridge Air National Guard Base with the F-15s. What a great example of our strength. We have leading capabilities in our armed vehicles and ground systems. And we know last summer, Secretary Del Toro at the time of the Navy joined the governor on the stage, partnering with Macomb Community College, with the Macomb Corridor of Defense Manufacturers for shipbuilding. It was the Michigan Maritime Manufacturing Initiative here in the state of Michigan. So this topic is mission critical to the entire United States. We're looking to grow our defense suppliers as a nation, our workforce, and our capabilities. And I'm excited to hear this panel talk about what their opinion is on what's Michigan's role in America's defense. And it is now my honor to introduce our special speaker for today, United States Senator Elissa Slotkin. Senator Slotkin has been a leading advocate for bringing critical manufacturing back to not only the United States, but certainly here in Michigan, and strengthening America's national security. Prior to serving in Congress, I know many of you know this, she's well known in Michigan and now well known across the United States. She's served in various national security roles in the CIA, the White House, the Pentagon, under two different presidents, Barack Obama and George W. Bush, eventually serving as the Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. Please join me in a warm welcome to Senator Slotkin to the stage for a special presentation.
Thanks so much.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Are we feeling okay? Is everyone recovering from last night? I try to explain to people, she's like, the mornings are always slow. I'm like, it's because the nights are so long on Mackinac. So thanks for having me. I am your new junior senator from the great state of Michigan. And my happiest moments are when I get to live in the Venn diagram of all things Michigan and all things defense. When they intersect, I am truly enjoying my time, the legislation, and the work that we get to do. And I think I was excited to do this panel most of all because of the moment that we're in Michigan. We just accomplished something that took us a decade of time and energy, and that was getting a replacement fighter mission at Selfridge Air Force Base on top of our refueler mission. And what happens when you as a state, your governor, your state leaders, your federal delegation, what happens when everyone is focused in a very bipartisan way on one goal, and then you accomplish it, right? Well, you get to celebrate it. You get to have a few good months and a few good moments. But the truth is, it actually is a moment for recreation and rebirth on what we want to do as a defense community in the state of Michigan. So it's on us to actually think through that and think how Michigan in particular can specialize in our strengths, but help the future fight for the whole country. And what I want to talk to you today is like my back of the envelope 2030 defense plan for what I think we should be focusing on over the next decade here in the state of Michigan. For those of you who I haven't met, I live in Holly, Michigan. You heard my national security background, so it's impossible once you're raised in the national security world to take those glasses off and not see the world through a national security lens. But it's also impossible to grow up in Michigan and not understand our specialties here. We did something that is extremely relevant for the moment that we're in right now, back when Henry Ford invented the assembly line, right? He did this thing that created a monumental leap forward for manufacturing in the United States. Now, it's many years in the past, but the idea is the same, that we need to figure out what is that giant leap forward when it comes to defense issues in 2025, right? What's the modern day equivalent of going from, hand tooling and making individual carriages one by one to creating a manufacturing line that at one point was employing, just in the city of Detroit alone, almost 300,000 people. The military thinks in these leaps as well, right? For those of you who are defense nerds like myself, you might know what it means to say we're looking for the next offset, right? American history on the national security side are us figuring out those giant leaps forward on the defense side, which has created us being the strongest military in the world. The first offset, nuclear weapons. And not just the nuclear race that we competed in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, but then creating tactical nukes, right? Taking that technology and being able to dominate any other nation state in the world because of our nuclear arsenal. Fast forward to post-Vietnam era. Just understanding the second offset, which was how do we get more long-range intelligence and technology? How do we start building ISR into our thinking? How do we get better information on our adversaries to inform our policymaking? The third offset in military competitiveness is upon us, right? Is the combination of the power of supercomputing and technology combined with the decision-making functions of a human being. That is the next offset that we've been working on since pretty much, I would say, 2012, 2014. How do we take all the best of technology and give it to the warfighter? So instead of just taking that hill, he has 360-degree visibility on what is happening up and around that hill and over that hill. We get other eyes on from other positions so that that soldier isn't just using what he has at his advantage. He's using the full suite of technological tools. But I would offer that the next big shift, something that we're seeing in real time in a place like Ukraine, is what I consider a fourth offset. The future of defeating our adversaries and making sure we remain the dominant party in the world, the dominant military, is being able to go from concept to fielding of a new system in less than the time it takes us right now. Right now, the Pentagon is an incredible place to be working, but if you have a new cool idea and you're a company that wants to serve your country, it will take, on average, 3 years to go from concept to actually fielding that weapon system or whatever, surveillance system, whatever it is. In China, that flash to bang is 1 year, from concept to fielding. So if we want to dominate the next generation in the world on global power, we have to be able to move faster than we can currently move. And I know defense contractors in Michigan feel this acutely, right? You're constantly trying to get that new mission, that new contract. It takes forever. And we know that new startups live in often what we call the valley of death. They have a great idea, they can't get the attention of the big defense contracts, and they die in the vine and don't survive as entrepreneurs because they live in that valley of death. There's no sort of dynamism. So what I'm offering for Michigan is for us to think ahead a decade about the new military missions, the new tech, and the new jobs, particularly in manufacturing, that are going to help not only the state of Michigan, but also the Pentagon and our military organizations propel us into the future and win the fights of the future. We're seeing a lot of this iteration in a place like Ukraine, right? I give the Ukrainians a lot of credit. They are figure out, particularly in drone technology, they have an idea, they're putting a commercial drone together with their best aerospace engineers, and they're figuring out new ways to do things, new ways to engage in warfare that the world has really never seen. That's the kind of dynamism we need to bring to traditional manufacturing. Now, when it comes to new missions, right, new military missions, you know we don't have active duty bases here, but we have some competitive advantages that we need to double down on, okay? We have some of the largest amounts of uninterrupted airspace east of the Mississippi. People love that, particularly our Air Force friends, right? They love to be able to maneuver and move around. So what our mission is, certainly in my office, is to make sure we do full permanent funding and expanded funding for our Northern Strike Operation exercise up in, yes, I know the Grayling guys are very excited to hear that. Yes, we love it for Grayling, but I also want to say it's the largest multi-domain exercise east of the Mississippi. We do things with drones, with Spectrum. We got to bring more and more private sector players into that fight and simulate, thank you for the one guy clapping, simulate what I think the real future of warfare is, which was a pairing up of our best commercial tech with the know-how of the US military. Number two, we need to bring new technology into our processes. We need to understand that the manufacturing of the future is not going to look like the manufacturing of our past, right? There's no longer the greasy floor with 100 guys working the same repetitive motion. We need AI involved in the process, 3D printing involved in the process, iteration involved in the process. We need an entirely different way of looking at things, and no one is better poised to think about those things than Michigan. Because it's hard enough to manufacture things, right? People think it's easy. It's hard enough to do it. But to be the leaders of the future, we need to be the leaders of new manufacturing techniques. We can't live in the past. We have to integrate all these new tools, and we need our next generation to help us do that. And then that's going to help us bring the new jobs of the future, right? Right now, we think we have about 166,000 defense jobs in the state of Michigan. But for a state that represents 3% of the nation's population, we're doing about 1% of the defense contracts. We're going to change that, people, okay? And 75% of our contracts are with the Army. We're going to change that too. We love our Army, but we're not just about ground vehicles. That's not the only thing we know how to do. We know how to make things with precision. So the jobs of the future and attracting a new generation to Michigan, right? Not just losing people to go to other places like Silicon Valley or wherever they want to do cool stuff. We're going to be attracting people with the new techniques, the new technology that we build into manufacturing. So I know my time is up. The clock is up here, but I just wanted to kind of roll this out, a little bit of thinking. I know we'll talk about it, but the future for us is helping our military with that fourth offset, which is really rapid, dynamic manufacturing for the best ideas. And if they don't work, we scrap them and we start with something new. So thanks for being here. Thanks for caring about defense in Michigan. We're going to do some kick-ass things. And Selfridge was just the beginning. So thanks, everybody. You want me to come back down? Okay.
Well, that is a powerful message I think you just shared with our senator. I don't know if you recall this. We didn't get a chance to talk about this, but the first time I met you was actually, it was not at the Pink Pony.
Yeah.
You were co-chairing a bipartisan task force with Gallagher on critical supply chain during COVID.
Yeah.
And I got the phone call, I think from your office. I was the Chief Workforce Development Officer at SME, and the call came in because at that time you were both a bipartisan study around the critical supply chain of materials that were affecting our national security again, right? Rare earth minerals. And so as you look, and you've really now spent, right, your career, right, both when you were with the CIA and the different agencies, and now here as in the public office, how do you see, and you touched on this, the vulnerabilities that the national defense industry has and how Michigan can kind of rise to that occasion? You touched a little bit on the private sector, our workforce, but going back and hearkening, I'm thinking back to that supply chain conversation, what can we be doing with our workforce and dominating the strong workforce we have here to support the defense industry?
Yeah, well, I think that task force with former Representative Mike Gallagher, who's now at Anderl, came from, I think, the experience most Americans had during COVID, where we sort of realized, holy moly, our supply chains are way overinvested abroad. And the average person is like, I can't get a couch, I can't get a TV, I can't get things delivered, but it made us do some hard thinking about our defense supply chains. And in general, we have Buy American requirements that are different than the commercial sector, so we could assume that it was better off, but we picked up the rug and there were like a lot of creepy crawlies under there, right? We, at one point, we figured out that 90% of our propellant, so what makes our weapons go boom, was sole sourced to China. So the irony that if we ever, God forbid, had to go to war with China, we would need some things that go boom, and that 90% of that propellant came from them. That's an insane thing to do as a military, right? So we came up with a bunch of recommendations and legislation, and I think in general, Americans have gotten the Buy America bug in a bigger way since COVID. Yeah. So I think we're less vulnerable than like the iPhones you all have in your pockets, right? The things that people care about in their civilian lives. But there's still work to do. And I think the thing that I am super interested in is how do we get our military, this is sensitive, but how do we get our military to look first to the commercial space and adapt a commercial piece of tech rather than build, with our lovely primes, who I love, from whole cloth, a completely new system. Because we know that the drag factor on that is the requirements process, right? Those of you who've worked in this system know that by the time the requirements are written, by the time you meet all the requirements, there's one company that can win the bid. It's a company you've definitely heard of, and it doesn't inspire a brand new company to actually be able to compete. So I think that Michigan, I think also during COVID, people realized that you can't just create a manufacturing space out of thin air, right? Remember the ventilator story? Everyone's like, who can build ventilators? Who can build ventilators? Turns out you can't just like start from nothing and build a ventilator. You have to have a defense, an industrial base. So I think Michigan is very poised as we continue this like pulling of our supply chains back home to compete. But my point is, we just got to bring the new techniques. We can't be like thinking backwards that, well, we're great because we invented the car. Yeah. We are great because we invented the car, but we're now going to invent the next cool shit here in Michigan with some new techniques.
Right, and I think building out that supply base, as you said, for some of those commercial suppliers that may be automotive focused, how do we get them in? Because we've had that reduction in our supply chain, or our suppliers of the defense contract.
And I think people in the manufacturing space are like, yeah, I'd love to get a defense contract, but I just don't have the bandwidth, the energy, the time to wait the 3 years to break through, so I'm just going to stick to my bread and butter, which is largely automotive. Yeah. That is, for them, it makes total sense. For the Pentagon, that's just dumb, right? That we can't take the folks who already make the best ground vehicles in the world and just figure out how to quickly pair together, to iterate, to move. And so it's bad for our industrial base. It's also bad for national security that these processes take way too long.
Yes, right. And I know I saw Olga here from Apex Accelerator. I know you help with a lot of those defense manufacturers do their work. How can the state and the defense industry look and work more effectively together with the federal government, the private sector, to address and partner to leverage Michigan's strengths? As you said, it's a prowess of manufacturing strengths. The automotive industry has always been strong. But how do we work together as the private sector, nonprofits, the state of Michigan? I'm thinking about the Navy. You said the Army, right, has been strong, but the Navy came. And I know they're busy in, the Honolulu and the Gulf Coast, but the Great Lakes and the state of Michigan.
So this is, again, going to be controversial, but Michigan is really, really good at a bunch of things, and we're Midwesterners, and we don't brag on ourselves enough. And other states, including, if I can get your blood up a little bit, Ohio, do a much better job of pitching themselves and talking about themselves and advertising themselves outside of the state, right? And it's great if we can send our senior leaders to go and bring other senior leaders, right? We're bringing senior military leaders here for Northern Strike this year. So how do we bring people in to show off episodically? That's great. We can do that till the cows come home. But I need us to, and it's the same way on a bunch of industries. We just put our heads down, do good work, believe that good work is going to beget good results. And that's true in some cases, but in this world, I am sick of losing competitions to other states who just advertise what they do better. And by the way, they don't do what we do better than us, right? They just advertise it better. And so I think Michiganders need to understand our worth. We need to show it off and not feel like that's, not right. We need to be at
not appropriate.
We need to be at every international event, every international conference. We need to be shoving ourselves down. I mean, I see what obviously Texas does in Washington. I see now what Ohio does in Washington, and I'm like, no, I'm not having that, right? We have to beat them at their own game because we have the manufacturing base that they just don't have in the same way.
Right, and the grit and the culture and the hard work.
The whole thing. The grit and culture is what makes us do great work. It's also what makes it hard to brag on ourselves. And we got to get out of that.
Well, I think we know she's going to be having that in Washington, sharing that. So thank you, Senator, for the comments, and we're going to have you joined by two of our upcoming panelists. So thank you for that special time with. Please help me welcome our next panelist. We're going to have Colonel John Gutierrez. He's the Executive Director of the Office of Defense, Aerospace, and Innovation, which is part of the MEDC organization. Some of you may remember last year, Governor Whitmer announced this new office. And so John, please join me on stage. Thank you. And next, I'd like to welcome Erik Smith. He's the President and Chief Executive Officer of Saab, Inc., which is headquartered in Syracuse, New York, and has 10 facilities in the United States. Saab delivers advanced systems in aeronautics, weapons, command and control, sensors, and underwater systems to the United States Armed Forces, the Federal Aviation Administration, and commercial partners. Thanks.
And has locations in Michigan, right? Locations in Michigan, which we appreciate.
Yes, and we'll jump to that. We'll jump because that is something exciting that we've, as the Senator just mentioned, is Saab has made a decision, and I saw last month you and the governor and others were doing the ground breaking here in. You've picked the state of Michigan, so tell us about that.
Well, sure. So we've made the decision to build our home base for our weapons and ammunition business in Grayling, Michigan. Very excited about that. Honestly, we looked across the nation, and when it came to the assets and the infrastructure and the workforce that Michigan provide, it was a bit of a no-brainer at the end of the day. The partnership with Camp Grayling has been unbelievable. The conversation we've had for a long time, our ability to get the workforce that we need. You guys just talked about sort of the manufacturing DNA that's in Michigan, and not just in Michigan, I would say, but also really wanting to come back to Michigan. I mean, that's been one of our big realizations here in the early days, is that we've had tremendous success since the announcement of people that have been all over the country that just want to come back to Northern Michigan now that the jobs are going to be there. So, we've had it's been a great run so far. I'm really excited to see where it goes, and we'll start building our shoulder-fired portfolio and precision strike portfolio in Grayling, mid next year. So
Awesome.
And when talking to Erik in preparation, he was sharing. He said, no, we see a lot of manufacturers struggle to find workers and people to, fill their jobs. And Erik's experience so far in the state of Michigan has been a very positive one, so that's great.
That's been great.
John, Governor Whitmer and the state legislature have been taking proactive steps to place Michigan at the forefront of the revitalization on our national defense capability via this new office. Can you share a little bit of the vision around Michigan's defense strategy and industry, and how how that's been going since you've been taking this new office?
Sure, that's a great question, and thanks for asking. So what we've really been focused on this past year is developing the strategic plan with a 5-year outlook for defense and aerospace within the state. And what we've defined as a vision is kind of what we've been talking about here, is to reimagine the arsenal of democracy, in which government, industry, and academia can thrive in the markets of tomorrow, and be agile enough to pivot and adjust to those markets as national security demands require.
Any observations that you've had so far, right, kind of coming into the ecosystem, if you will? There's a lot, and I know you've spent time with the senator and Erik and others. Any observations that you've had after the first? It was about a year now, right?
Yeah, just over a year. So my observation is really, there's this palpable energy within the ecosystem, within that culture. It was mentioned before, and we have this rich heritage of manufacturing and innovation and patriotism. And you're seeing this in the ecosystem. When we go out to various locations, you're seeing companies who may not necessarily be in the defense market today, but they're interested in pivoting or looking at dual use capabilities, et cetera.
Senator, I know you've had the chance to work with both of them. Any comments as you've looked at this new office here in the state and how it differs across, it's something I think very unique to the state of Michigan, at least from what we've been seeing?
Yeah, I think it's super important, and I do think other states in some cases have this position or have a version of this position, right? And so it's important that we have an office that is thinking about defense issues. And of course, you can imagine what they do down in Texas, right, with the huge number of active duty troops they have down there. But for us, we've always been so focused on autos that we need to up our game on defense contracts. And it's not because we don't have the best workers. And so I think the culture is moving towards a place where we all understand that we're in one place and we can really supercharge ourselves. It's just a matter of doing that. And even this morning, we have to get our heads in the game on our own valley of death here in Michigan, right? This idea that you can have great ideas, but then, and maybe have like seed money for the most sort of newest organizations and companies who are looking at tech. And then you have our big primes. But how do we make sure that middle here, in the like sort of forming stages, gets what they need from the state so that we can launch them into the future? Because the way that you become the hub for advanced manufacturing and the use of technology in manufacturing and iteration is by having more and more companies want to headquarter here, want to put their forces here, want to put their effort in here. So success begets success. We need those new folks doing cool stuff to be supported.
Well, and that's a good example. If we look at what Erik, and while I know you're headquartered out of, you have the U.S. headquarters in Sweden. It's a foreign-owned company, but that's also one of our allies and an important part of how we could also grow our defense manufacturing base here. Erik, how do you think Michigan and the U.S. can think about companies locating, like Saab has, and foreign allies as a growth engine for the state of Michigan?
Yeah, I think you have to look at allied domiciled companies. We think a little bit differently than the traditional U.S. defense primes. It's a much more commercial world out there outside the United States, so the bubble of the United States market. And so if you look at what we're doing in Grayling, it's much more of a see the problem, understand the problem, and then build the capacity and the infrastructure to help solve the problem. We're not asking people for money. We're not asking the Pentagon for money to fund the activity. We're going to build this, seeing that the problem exists and the magazine depth issue is real in the United States, and that we have to build for our national security. We have to build the capacity to be able to replace the weapons and systems that we're using in Ukraine and to build the stocks we need for the future. We're going at it. We're taking it head on, and I think you see a much more commercial mindset from the international companies than you do the traditional American primes. It's great to see some of the new startups in the U.S. that are starting to think more commercially and put that kind of pressure on the industry more broadly. But traditionally, the defense industry in the U.S. has been one of the more entitled industries in the world, if I can be a little provocative. And I think whether it's our allied partners or new, more commercially focused startups, it's a huge opportunity for the state of Michigan to really embrace those folks, show the infrastructure and assets and workforce that's available here. Because I think when you look at it overall and you understand what Michigan has to offer as it relates to defense tech, it's a pretty compelling story.
And can I just say, I think, there's, while there's lots of things that are not going well in Washington, there still is. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. I was lucky to get the one open slot on the committee as a freshman. And there is still a great degree of bipartisan work that goes on in that committee. It's just not at the headline level, right? Like we're not solving our immigration issues in that committee. Thank God. We're focused on the Pentagon. And to be honest, it's one of the few areas in the entire budget that is going up while everything else is going down. Right. Now, going up doesn't mean we invest in the right things. Going up doesn't mean that we're spending that in a smart way. And I think there's a lot of bipartisan interest in thinking through commercial options, right? And Erik's completely right that when we think about a new system, we're like, what can we invent from the ground up and build ourselves in a sole source way? Right? As opposed to, what if there was a requirement that you had to first look for commercial options and augmenting a commercial option, and if there was absolutely nothing that existed in the commercial space, then you could think about creating something from scratch. That alone would force so much change, and it's controversial again, but it would force so much change because the Pentagon would then be looking to the commercial sector first. Just like the Ukrainians, right, are like buying drones off Amazon, putting on a scope or a little they're doing some interesting things and showing us how we can do it. And by the way, saving a huge amount of money.
And time. And time.
Right, time. So if speed is the name of the game, commercial options are also part of the equation.
There's a lot of discussion around that speed, right? Accelerating our production.
That's the whole game.
Yeah, it's and a lot of the concerns, right, of if we do have to surge capacity, how do we be prepared to be accelerant, which creates that culture and that thinking that is different than maybe what's
And look, the Chinese, like I said, they can go from concept to fielding in a year. We do it in 3 years. Now, they're also an authoritarian nation, and they don't have a whole lot of requirements and rules and regulations, and they just go. So we live within our system, but that doesn't mean every rule and regulation makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think we can, I was at the Pentagon, right? And I know firsthand that well-intentioned rules and regulations overlapping each other in a giant pile can create complete gridlock. So we also have to talk about pulling things off the regulation list.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator. As we look at the state of Michigan and we think about, you kind of talked about that diversification, right? We're strong in the Army, and we have some certainly other aspects that we do here in the state for different military needs. John, maybe as you look at what the office, the ODA office is doing, are there certain sectors or investments that you're starting to look at in terms of that diversification for the state?
Well, we are. So we're looking at the critical national needs that have been identified by the Department of Defense. We're aligning a lot of our efforts towards those areas. But there are opportunities. I would say it was discussed a little earlier about autonomous or machine learning, artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, hypersonics, and then just good old-fashioned munitions. Those are
like those two.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in the maritime space, I think diversification is really the key So, we cannot wed ourselves just to ground systems, although, I love ground systems as a Marine. But we have to look at all domains of warfare, whether it be air, land, sea, space, cyber, et cetera. And those are really what I see as growing, opportunities.
Any other comments on that from Erik or the Senator on that?
I think Michigan is right for that diversification. I mean, we're having a shipbuilding conversation in the Midwest right now, right? And that's not an intuitive thought process, but and you're not going to be building aircraft carriers and destroyers in the Great Lakes. But there's a lot of other ships out there that the Great Lakes do make a lot of sense for. And that workforce component that we've been talking about against the requirements of the National Shipbuilding Base makes a lot of sense, right? And as you look across, how do we use the university network here to enable innovation in the autonomy and AI ML space? I think there's a lot of upside there as well. And so I think it's right to be focused on diversity, but there are some key areas where, as I look at it, whether it's shipbuilding or otherwise, there's opportunities there for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think autonomous systems are just in general, but drones in particular are an area that is so hot right now in Washington, right? Because you counter UAS, countering systems. You look at what's going on in Ukraine, and we have a situation where drones, $900 a pop, used in conjunction in a swarming fashion, can bring down an F-35. Right? And we see some of our most important technology undercut by really cheap, easy stuff. And you see China investing in autonomous Air Force formations. I mean, literally, this is stuff that you could have thought was from science fiction, that we could have a situation where a manned Air Force is going up against a largely unmanned but tethered network of drones.
Yeah.
And we have human beings in the cockpit, so we're more risk averse than a bunch of autonomous systems. So these are confounding us as a nation. And if you think about that, we need to hyper accelerate our investment in our own drone capability, but also in counter drone. Right, in understanding how in a crowded place, right, at a University of Michigan game at the Big House, someone could kamikaze a drone. I'm not trying to create a problem here. I'm just saying, I think about these things. It's hard to take the national security glasses off. And so what's the technology we're going to use to take that down? And we need that innovation and that iteration to be going on. And there's no one should be doing that better than us because of our manufacturing base, but also because we have these huge swaths of area we can test this stuff, right? You can't test that stuff in New York City. And so to me, there's a real I have a special interest in the kind of autonomous systems generally and drones specifically.
And drones not just in the air, but
Yes.
on the water too, right? That's the next piece of this puzzle. You see that in Ukraine as well.
Totally.
Smaller boats, unmanned, autonomous assets, swarming, those kind of things. It's an air problem and it's a surface problem.
Yeah.
Just last week we were at Camp Grayling and the National All-Domain Warfighting Center for the Uncrewed Triple Challenge, which was it was a drone competition, kind of an Ironman competition, if you will, across all three domains. So land, maritime and air. And this was just the first in subsequent, iterations of this as well. And what we want to do is expand that over greater portions of Michigan.
And I just have to say, I did not know this before I became a congresswoman, but the special thing we have with our National Guard bases is that industry can rent space on the base. That is not permitted in an active duty base. So if you're down in Texas or if you're in all these big active duty places, they cannot allow the private sector to lease their space, test things, do all this. So we have National Guard bases. That's what we have, an Air National Guard. So our base commanders are part of the hustle of getting some of those innovators onto our spaces. And that's where we're going to surge past a place like Texas, right? Because they can do stuff off base, but we have the ability to test stuff in real time, and we should be doubling down on that.
That's the biggest reason we're in Michigan.
Yeah, see that?
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
See that press?
See that marketing? Yeah, see that marketing? Well, and I think you said that Iron Man, the drone of Iron Man, or Iron
Yeah,
Man
the
drone.
Uncrew Triple Challenge, kind of an Iron Man.
Yeah, I loved
competition.
it. But think about back to, kind of hyping things up and kind
Yeah.
of communicating. When we think about, a lot of times we spend time talking about manufacturing and these jobs and career pathways that need to fuel these organizations to have that innovation.
Yeah.
Here we are talking about some pretty cool, exciting stuff and technology. And I think sometimes manufacturing in our defense industry gets put into the things that we think of from yesteryears.
For sure.
And I think what I'm hearing a lot of you talk about here on the panel is leveraging the strengths of the state of Michigan that are already there.
Yeah, and making it like hot, right? I mean, to be honest, like that's an Iron Man drone competition is kind of like a hot shit thing.
Yeah.
And the thing I think about that's deep in our DNA is, for all the parents in the room, like most schools, particularly in the Detroit area, but well beyond, have a FIRST robotics team, right? Have a team of people. You've usually got some parents who are volunteering to train and educate kids on how to be a team and build robots that compete in competitions in high school gyms, right? I've gotten to judge some of these things. FIRST robotics clubs are the perfect place to start talking about drones, autonomous systems, start bringing young people out to Camp Grayling to see this kind of stuff. Defense can't be put in a box. We need to bring all those engineering students of the future into the defense conversation when they're in 8th grade, so that they're understanding that they can do really, really hot stuff in Michigan.
Yeah, and protect our nation.
And protect our nation.
Right. And that, which is pretty good,
That
right?
too.
Yeah, and so Erik, you kind of talked about the Navy, right? And you think about, and actually have the opportunity, I've been working with the United States Navy on particular on their workforce challenges. And the Great Lakes was a big conversation. And there was a lot of attention actually here, and we know, and John with M3. Is there anything you want to share with us of what we've been seeing there with M3 and the Macomb Community College? I know that just kicked off. I think we had our first set of graduates, right?
Yeah, we did.
For that program.
Just recently, we had our first cohort of graduates for some of those, critical skills, just skilled trades, welders, CNC machinists, et cetera. And then another, so 2-part effort with the Michigan Maritime Manufacturing Initiative. First part is workforce, of course. And the second piece is bolstering our supply chains to, and those companies to be able to grow and thrive in that area. And there's some very specific and very unique requirements to working on submarines. For example, Naval Sea Systems Command certification, NAVSEA certification. These requirements are so stringent, as they should be on a nuclear submarine. And so, just trying to highlight that for our companies, again, to present opportunities.
And were you sharing with me, John, that you go around the state, right? You hold different, to work with manufacturing companies, either current defense suppliers or those maybe looking to become
That's correct.
diversify in the state?
We have an extensive outreach campaign throughout the state. We align with our 10 Apex accelerators. And so what we do is just about a monthly basis, you see us throughout the state, and we'll sit there and we'll describe what our office is, what we do, but then also some of the resources that the state can provide to companies, again, to make them more competitive. And not only are we talking about 2 companies that are in the defense and aerospace sector, but companies that are interested in coming into this. And we're not only talking about defense manufacturers, we're talking about other groups as well. Like the tribes of Michigan are very interested in investing in defense, et cetera. There are entrepreneurs, there are other venture capitalists, et cetera, who are coming to these groups, but they're growing over time. So that's a good thing. There's this energy.
Erik, any as you speculate into the future, any thoughts about what might be in the future for Michigan, for Saab, as you look?
Well, sure. I mean, we.
I know you just got started, so.
We are just getting started, but
He's moving his headquarters from Syracuse, New York, to Grayling, Michigan. It's a big announcement.
we never, from a Saab perspective, we tend to think very long term. So we don't make decisions for point sort of tactical reasons. And so you can see that in Grayling, right? We're clearing 60 acres to build this first, what I call phase 1 of the activity. It's about 100 jobs. We have an office we're opening in Auburn Hills to access some more engineering talent down there. And so that's kind of phase 1 for me. But we've bought 388 acres in Grayling, and if we do our job and things go the way that I expect it to, I think we will fully utilize that capacity over time. to really help the Pentagon with this magazine depth issue that they have, both across the enterprise, really. And so that's, within our land systems group and our weapons and ammunition business, that's the focus right now. But I could see Saab doing things, in other parts of our portfolio here in Michigan too, in the not too distant future. And John and I've spent a lot of time talking about that. And I think there's, I'm a Michigan fan, and I see there's a lot of synergy with what we need to make this business continue to grow at the pace it's been growing. And so we'll continue to look for those opportunities in partnership with the state and the different National Guard bases out here, because those are really important partnerships and a really unique asset that Michigan has to bring to the table.
Are there things you think of for advice for people like those here or others on how Michigan could improve, right? So it sounds like we've done some good things, but anything from your perspective representing the private sector?
I always say these things go, there's a relationship between the level of integration from the local communities to the federal level, and how smooth and these processes go and the growth happens. And so, I just continue to say that, being able to have the conversations here with the governor and her staff and MEDC and get that same sort of support and message all the way up to the senator's office, and that's really important. You don't see that everywhere, and it's really important to have from local to federal integration in terms of the messaging and the support for what companies are trying to do and for the industry. And so, we continue to see that here, and it's been great.
I think that's really important. We hear that over and over from companies that decide to come to Michigan. They are interested in us because of our workforce and because we have a tradition of skilled trades, but they finally pull the trigger on coming because they feel like they're getting the right welcome mat up and down the chain, right? There's not a disconnect. The local leaders love it, but the federal leaders won't give them the time of day, or vice versa. So that kind of personal approach, I think, is really important. I will say that because I'm in the room with a bunch of innovators, that I think we also need to put this industry in context for the revolution that's coming with artificial intelligence, both on the military side, but also what it's going to do to our economy. I mean, there are some estimates that AI is going to have more impact on our economy than the internet did, okay? And think about how different our economy is today than it was in, 1988, before we sort of mainstreamed the internet. A lot of different jobs, a lot of different sort of needs in the workforce. So AI is about to do that, and we've been trying to get smart in my office, and one of the things that we keep hearing from all of our experts on AI is because AI is training on large language models, the first jobs to go are going to be the ones that kind of amalgamate the written word, right? So paralegals, or that amalgamate large groups of data, or sets of data. So radiology techs, like people who read that first line scans. A lot of those jobs, the first line jobs for a lot of college graduates, are going to go away. And the things that are harder to replicate are the things that are in a dynamic environment, that aren't just about language, but are about like fixing things and moving things and different humidities, different pressures. That's harder to plan for and to teach. And so Michigan is poised to have what we do actually be more survivable than a lot of other professions, right? And we already know there's layoffs going on in places like California, right? If you're a video game designer or something like that. So if Michigan's thing, it's kind of like, I saw someone here wearing acid wash jeans. I'm like, it's back again. Like, what was popular is now back. What we do is going to be even more important and resilient than a lot of other industries. And so we need to see that and see ourselves in the span of history and double down on what we're really, really good at.
No, I think that's a great point. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
It is scary to think about those changes and the acid wash jeans coming back. But
it was amazing. The outfit was great.
John, as you've looked at your role here, are there things kind of similar to what I asked Erik? Anything that you've seen that you would say to the state of Michigan for those that are trying to do what we can to kind of deliver on what Senator just shared? Thoughts of how we can improve, because it's all the good things that we do. Or some things you'd say, hey, if we could do this, or if the private sector could do that, nonprofits, educators.
Sure. great question. I think kind of to Senator Slotkin's point, we need to amplify the state's unique advantages. There are so many great strengths of this state that just are not known outside. I am not a native Michigander, came here by choice.
It's okay.
But I love it, and I am a Michigander now. And so whether it be manufacturing, entrepreneurship, innovation, et cetera, but infrastructure for innovation, our National Guard bases, that is such a strength to the state and to our Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security. You can do a lot of great work up at the National All-Domain Warfighting Center, Alpena, et cetera. And that's just, I think getting the word out and amplifying that's going to be so critical.
Sounds like we're having a very strong theme about our strengths in Michigan's and how we need to kind of play those up a little bit more. Like you said, not the humble Midwest.
Nope.
Well, we are going to open it up to the floor for questions. So I think we've got some mics, maybe roaming mics, for anyone in the audience that has a question for our three panelists. It looks like we have one in the middle.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry, pardon me. I'm Kareem Sykes with Echelon. We are directly contracted with the DoD Office of Small Business Programs, and I just can appreciate this conversation. Particularly, I wanted to highlight the fact that as we talk about involving Michiganders, right, in defense, one of the things I think is hugely imperative is that we talk about CMMC, right? The Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, which is essentially DoD's line in the sand, right, for eligibility for contracting opportunities. And so with that, what I'm doing is I'm traveling around the country advocating and evangelizing, if you will, the no-cost resources that DoD has provisioned through Project Spectrum, right, which is a program essentially designed to provide self-assessments, online cybersecurity trainings, right, to help companies prepare for what is inevitably coming, right? We know that Title 32 of the Code of Federal Regulations, as of 16 December of 24, officially established what many of us in the industry knew was coming. And so as that happens, we want to make sure that Michiganders in the industry here, that they're ready, right, for eligibility, that they've taken advantage of the litany of resources that exist on projectspectrum.io. And so happy to talk with anyone about that after the session as to what DoD Office of Small Business Programs has provisioned to really help mitigate what could be another barrier to entry for many small businesses, including obviously Michiganders. I've worked with the Michigan Alliance, the Apex accelerators around the country, and so again, making sure that we not only train the trainers, if you will, right, those program managers and counselors for the Apexes respectively, but also talking to their respective constituencies about the resources that exist and have existed for some time now. So I just want to highlight that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments?
So we are right now very focused on that cybersecurity maturity model certification, and really a larger part of making our Michigan defense and aerospace companies more and more competitive. We have a Cyber Smart grant program now that we provide to our companies in Michigan. I think we provide up to $10,000 per, which is not nearly going to cover that cost, but we work with the University of Michigan to administer those programs. So,
Other questions?
As the senator said, we're a great airspace. So how do we best engage with the FAA to be the place for the testing and iteration that needs to be done, both on the commercial and the defense side?
Yeah, I'll start. I think the thing that we are experiencing right now, first of all, it's a tough moment for the FAA for a whole bunch of reasons, but there's a bunch of outstanding questions that have just sort of hung out there related to use of the airspace. What we've been talking about is instead of kind of going to them piecemeal, which is what certainly at the federal level we've occasionally been doing, we need to come up here in Michigan with like our list of prioritized asks and then go to them at the highest levels in a more formal way. I think right now we're kind of like, it's like any organization. You try to insert at the mid-level, you try to get an answer from someone, especially now, it's very, very difficult. What we've been thinking about is how do we get that full list, not so that we're not coming back 12 times to them and being like ankle biting at them, but like we've thought together as an entire state about what we need to get from them. And then we go in as a bipartisan group of legislators to say we want to meet with the senior brass so that we can have this real conversation with timelines to get back to us. So that's the thing we've been talking about because of how many people have come to us in different directions asking for help with the FAA. So maybe we can talk offline about the prioritized list.
Any other comments?
I would just offer from a Saab perspective, we have a lot of experience dealing with the issues you're talking about, founding the activity that goes on in Syracuse, New York. And so if we can help you from a Saab perspective, I'm more than happy to lend that sort of experience, because we've had pretty good success with the New Air Consortium in around Griffiths Air Force Base. And if it can help, we're here to help.
And I would say also in the execution and planning of that uncrewed triple challenge that occurred last week, we followed a whole of state of government approach from the Michigan perspective, working with the National Guard, working with the Michigan Department of Transportation, MEDC, and other stakeholders in order to get some of those FAA certifications to be able to execute that aerial portion of that
Great.
triple challenge.
Did we have any other questions out? We probably have time for maybe one more if we did. If not, I'll ask each of the panelists maybe a closing thought as we just have a couple minutes here. Anything, certainly we've talked about, opportunities, Michigan's strengths, new investments in our area, new offices focused on it, new senator focused on, the strength of Michigan and representing that out in Washington. Any closing remarks from our panelists?
I would just offer that the assets and infrastructure in Michigan for defense is real, and I would just encourage all of us. It's incumbent upon all of us, whether industry or government, to continue to espouse those assets and get that message out there, because I think the senator was right. We undersell it to some degree, and I think we're going to realize the benefit of it here in the future. It is coming back around like acid wash jeans for sure.
We're not going to live that down. John?
With today's national security environment and geopolitical environment, there is a tremendous amount of opportunity within the defense and aerospace sector. And it could be very complex to operate, to get into this line of business, but it can be very rewarding. And so I think companies, industries, whether it be, and to include our academic, partners within the state as well. We just need to harness that and look for those opportunities.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously the national security opportunities are huge. The opportunities for Michigan are huge. I think it starts, though, with us taking a hard look at ourselves and saying, am I bringing in enough interns and students to train the next generation? Am I using the academic institutions to their max? Am I advertising what I'm doing, right? If you're doing something really cool, but it's like a tree falling in the woods and no one knows about it, there's not enough PR around it, are you doing enough to sort of attract more and more talent here? I think we all need, just like that we as a state need to have some hard conversations about how we brag on ourselves more, we also need our companies to say, hey, let's just try to think outside the box for a minute. Are we doing all we can to innovate and to bring in that next generation? Because we need it as a state, we need it as a country.
No, I think those are all great comments, and if I build on just something you just said there, Senator, is sometimes I get asked, as I mentioned, I was the Chief Workforce Development Officer for almost 25 years at SME, and a lot of it was around workforce and talent and finding people. And I'd often say to people, it's a hidden industry. Most people don't even really know it exists. They certainly don't understand how cool it is, the opportunities. And our manufacturers, and then even more so in defense, kind of hide what the end game is. Mm-hmm. And we put the jobs out and we say a CAD CAM, programmer or software engineer, but we really don't say what they're going to go do and how it affects lives or how it affects their economy that they're in or our national security. Mm-hmm. So I think your points are spot on how we have to reshift how we think about that. Well, please join me in thanking the panel for this morning, talking about Michigan's role in America's defense. Senator John and Erik, thank you so much for your comments and your perspective and your time. Thank you.